Tonight on a special Independent Sources, on the road to reform, what's at stake as the future of millions of immigrants lies in the balance. Welcome to our special look at the future of immigration reform. I'm Viano Ravinka.
And I'm Gary Pierre-Pierre. That once untouchable topic was back on just about everyone's lips after President Obama's win in the November general election. Much of the mainstream media emphasized that Hispanics came out in droves to support the president, while many Republicans retorted that one way to return Hispanics and other minorities to the right was by addressing the immigration issue.
Over the last few years, many proposals have been floated and then shot down. Some of the sticking points include whether people who have been here illegally should be given an amnesty, and also should immigrants be required to pay a fine for being here without proper documentation.
These points are expected to be hotly debated in the coming weeks as the president gets set to tackle the issue yet again. So what may a final bill look like? And will some of the requirements be too strict for even the most willing immigrant?
With us in studio tonight to talk about the possible shape of a comprehensive immigration reform strategy are Angela Fernandez of the Northern Manhattan Immigration Coalition and Abraham Paulos of the immigrant advocacy group Families for Freedom. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to start a conversation by looking at two clips, one from President Obama and the first from Senator Lindsey Graham addressing how reform should tackle the estimated 12 million illegal immigrants living in the United States.
The 12 million, what to do about them? Some should leave because they're not adding value to our country. They've broken the law outside of illegal immigration, and they should be deported as soon as possible. But there are millions of people who've been here for a very long time. And once we secure our border and get verifiable documents in place, we should turn to these folks and say, if the only crime you've committed is to come here illegally, you've kept your nose clean and you're hardworking, come out of the shadows, we're going to biometrically identify you, we're going to give you a card, you're going to start paying taxes, and you can't stay here unless you pass English proficiency exams, and you got to get right with the law by paying a fine, and you can never become a citizen by breaking in the line. You got to get back of the line, you got to earn your way forward to citizenship. You can't jump in front of people who are doing it right.
When I say comprehensive immigration reform, it is very similar to the outlines of previous efforts at comprehensive immigration reform. I think it should include a continuation of the strong border security measures that we've taken, because we have to secure our borders. I think it should contain serious penalties for companies that are purposely hiring undocumented workers and taking advantage of them. And I do think that there should be a pathway for legal status for those who are living in this country, are not engaged in criminal activity, are here simply to work. It's important for them to pay back taxes. It's important for them to learn English. It's important for them to potentially pay a fine. But to give them the avenue whereby they can resolve their legal status here in this country, I think is very important.
Let's talk about some of the main points raised in these clips. The English proficiency exam, how surprised are you to hear about it? What do you make of it, Abraham?
I would say I'm very surprised by that, especially when we're talking about English proficiency. I mean, it just reminds me of the literacy test that folks had to take down in Ellis Island, I believe, you know, hundreds of years ago or years ago. And so to me, that just seems like we're just sort of rising the specter again around saying, you know, this literacy test.
Is that going to be a sticking point, do you think, Angela, as we debate the final look of this bill?
I don't necessarily think that's going to be the sticking point. I think the sticking point is going to be whether there's going to be a clear path to citizenship. And so that is the one in which the immigrant community is really focused on, and politically focused on it as well, because the members of Congress that will in the end be able to vote for this law, they're going to be watching them and making sure that they make a comprehensive law that is as broad as possible to accept the most people possible that are here.
For people who don't know what this path to citizenship, explain to us exactly what the path is.
It could come in many different ways, but one of the most basic ways is proof of having been in this country for a certain amount of time, and then being provided the ability to apply for a green card. You can't become a U.S. citizen until you have a green card. Then once you have a green card, you are eligible to apply for citizenship after 5 years, or if you marry a U.S. citizen, after 3 years.
What about the idea of undocumented immigrants having to pay fines? Do you think would most undocumented immigrants be okay with that?
I mean, a fine for what, really?
For being here illegally, for being here in the first place.
A study just came out from the Center for American Progress, I'm sorry to interrupt, that
fine.
shows that on average, undocumented immigrants who are actually paying taxes miss out on an average of $80,000 worth of benefits. So in the last iteration, in 2006, the fine was $4,000 per person. So if you are a family of 4, that is prohibitive. So the fine would have to be, if there is to be a fine,
But $4,000 per person in a family, whether if their children were born here, you still have to pay a fine. I mean, I don't get it.
From what I remember, it would be for those who are undocumented.
Yeah, only for those who are undocumented. If you have American citizen children, I mean, obviously that they are awarded the rights that any citizen would have.
But that's still prohibitive.
Right, definitely.
What about the biometrics, identifying people and basing the Social Security card on that? Angela?
Well, I mean, we can run into a number of issues and problems there. What's interesting is that the Republican Party probably would not like that as well. Would not like that either. Biometrics. There's definitely this. I mean, this country was founded on the basis of that the government would not have an ID for you. So I think that there are people in the Libertarian Party that would not support that.
Leslie Graham is the one who brought this, and you're saying that they would be opposed to it.
Well, I mean, aspects of the Republican Party. I mean, I can't speak for them, but I mean, but this is something that has been stated and spoken about.
When you enter the country, though, if you don't hold citizenship, whether or not you're here visiting or if you have a green card, your fingerprints are taken, so they're already in the system. Why would that even be an issue?
Well, because I think one of the proposals was that it be a biometric card for everyone. That was one of the things that I had learned.
I mean, Abraham, I want you to address this point. It seems now we're in a fast track to immigration reform. Was it the election that was the catalyst, or was there something else going on? Do you think there's something else at play besides the election here?
I think there were two things at play. I mean, I think first, Barack Obama, when he first ran in 2008, a lot of, sort of his platform did have a lot of immigration language, immigration reform language. I think that the past election did show that with Obama sort of in June having DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, did sort of help letting the Latin American sort of population in the U.S. sort of let them understand that he is trying to listen to their issues and trying to address those issues. So I think with the election, I do think that it does have some effect on it. And I also do think that the Republicans are sort of scrambling for more constituency, and I think that the Latin American and the Asian American vote was, was pretty prominent. I don't think we can deny that. As far as saying, are these the reasons why things are moving so quickly? I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think that there were other sort of historical factors that have been going on for a very, very long time, and it's just time to address them.
In addition to that, there's been a lot of organizing by the Dreamers. The fact that President Obama had had DACA is because of the organizing that has been going on by the Dreamers. And there's been other organizing occurring to stop enforcement of the laws, of enforcement which deports people, and unjustly. And so I think that's provided a groundswell in conjunction with the election that Abraham mentioned.
We'll have to take a break right now. When we come back, more from our guests on the future of immigration reform.
Should immigrants have to learn English to stay here?
Definitely. Yeah, this is an English-speaking country. I did this. I came to this country as an adult and I had to go to school.
Absolutely. I think it's just beneficial for them as well. And any, kind of enclosed enclave island type of effect that you would have with people living in communities where they only speak their own language would not necessarily be beneficial to them. So I would think that, yeah, they should learn.
No, I certainly don't feel that. There are so many languages that are spoken in this country. There are entire neighborhoods where different languages from English are spoken, and things work well. I think that it would certainly help anybody living in the United States to learn English, but should it be a requirement? Absolutely not.
Thanks for staying tuned to a special look at the road towards comprehensive immigration reform. Angela, I want to talk about how immigration seems to have become the Latino issue. How did that come about?
Well, I think that in the first round of protests that we saw in 2006 that really put the issue on the map for mainstream America, and those that were leading the marches did tend to come from Latin American countries, and so I think that's the first marker.
And the physical border also.
Exactly. The second point, and this is actually more of on the negative side, you have someone like Lou Dobbs on CNN, who made it as part of his...
He used to be on CNN.
Used to be on CNN, and it's actually the Latino community that organized to get him off of CNN, because there's a direct correlation between when he started speaking about the middle class and the demise of the middle class and blaming the immigrant population for that, and the level of hate crimes that increased in that decade against Latinos. By sheer number, yes. I mean, this, it is one of the largest immigrant groups. So that would be the kind of the simple, straight answer. But there has been a level of demonizing by some aspects of the media that has actually focused on the Latino community.
The last major comprehensive reform was under Ronald Reagan in 1986. Abraham, could you tell us a little bit more about what was done then and what can be possibly learned from that?
What Ronald Reagan did was sort of what folks consider an amnesty. I think that after that, I think 1996 is actually a year that sort of, when we want to talk about immigration reform of what happened in Congress, I think the two sort of set of laws that came out, IRA, or the Illegal Immigration Responsibility and Immigrant Reform Act, and the Anti-Terrorism Effective Death Penalty Act, I think these sort of laws that were passed actually affect us a lot more now than sort of what Ronald Reagan had done. It put in a slew of laws that actually make our immigrant landscape the way it is. I mean, one of those things is sort of judicial discretion, which is what had been taken out of the court. Also this issue of mandatory detention, mandatory deportation. And what this affects is also the undocumented community, but then also those that are here legally present, and in particular green card holders, which what I think will be an increasing number of deportees will also come from this population.
I mean, as reform happens, we're going to bump up against that. And just, one note is that even veterans who are green card holders, who have fought and put their life on the line, they can be mandatorily deported. And there is a growing, after the wars that we're having right now, there's a growing population of American vets that are deported back to their country of origin.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's all great that both parties want to have immigration reform. In the end, what kind of bill we're likely to get? What are some of your worries, some of the pitfalls where you see, they can really do us in at this point? This is where they're going to try to stick it to us.
I mean, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I was going to say my biggest concern, I think, also from the community is going towards criminalization. Right? I think a lot of the time, and I think it's couched in terms of enforcement, definitely down on the border of security, but then also this issue around those with criminal records. And now what we've seen is that even those that are undocumented, let's say places like Arizona and Maricopa County, where they are getting criminally charged for being undocumented, and they're couching this in terms of theft of identity or fraud. And so I think our biggest concern is sort of the criminalization of immigrants, and what we see as this reform. I mean, I don't think, as it stands right now with what Schumer and Graham are presenting, these are just basically adding on top.
Charles Schumer, the New York...
the New York Senator. Thank you for that clarification. And what we've seen is that these are not necessarily reforms. These are just laws that they're adding on to already the intensive enforcement sort of culture that we're seeing right now. And so I think that that's our biggest concern for me, I would say, in my constituency and my people.
Angela, I'd like to backtrack a little bit to what you just said previously, and referring to the vets who can be deported. Can you elaborate on that and explain how a green card holder who's been fighting America's wars can be deported? Why?
Well, just like Abraham said in 1996, the laws had changed so that a broader category of convictions, including misdemeanors, would place someone in mandatory deportation. So before 1996, a judge had discretion and could say, you know what, this person 15 years ago got arrested for possession of drugs, and it was a minor. It was considered a misdemeanor. They didn't even serve any time in jail for that. But let's look what's happened since then. Have they served in the military? Do they have U.S. citizen family members? Do they own a business? Are they contributing members to society? Then the immigration judge could say, you know what, there are some factors where this person should stay. 1996 took away that discretion for a judge to be able to do that. So that's where you will have then someone coming back from war. And as we all know, that is a very traumatic experience, and we can find ourselves, people who go through that kind of experience may make decisions that actually contravene the law. And then they may have all these other equities that would support them, and the biggest one, that they put their life on the line for the country, but that will not be enough because immigration judges' hands are tied and they will be mandatorily deported.
Wasn't there a movement, I remember, to give vets automatic citizenship?
I'm not familiar with that, so that may be the case. Yeah. But I don't want to also just focus on vets. I mean, there are many people who haven't been in the military who are incredibly important to people in this society and incredibly important to their community. And for things that for an old criminal conviction that can still come back to haunt them is incredibly unjust and a disproportionate punishment, and they're being punished twice and 3 times because many times when they go back to their country, they're treated as pariahs.
Right, and I also agree with Angela as far as saying not to just focus on vets or to just focus on the undocumented. I mean, really what we want to do is have this immigration reform go back to the central value of immigration law in this country, which is around the family, right? And so when we talk about the next steps and when we talk about what we want to see in sort of the comprehensive immigration reform is going back to that focus on sort of the family values and not trying to separate these families, whether they're vets, whether they're undocumented, or whether they're American citizen children who are about to lose family members.
We're due for another break. Stay tuned for some final thoughts from our guests.
When you think of illegal immigrants, what group of people come to mind first?
Of course, people like me from Latin America. Although I think most people ignore the fact that there are a lot of Chinese immigrants who are also here illegally and living under the same kinds of conditions that Latin Americans are living in, and we don't really think of them as the illegal population or your typical illegal immigrant.
Hard workers from different nationalities. You have people from Africa, Latin America, Asia, all over the world.
Basically people from Latin America, a lot from Mexico just because of the border itself, but Central America.
Mexican. Chinese.
Mexicans.
Yeah, all the time.
Mexicans, yeah.
Because I think media made it that way. The media made it out to be illegal immigrants.
They turn it into
automatically you
jokes
think
and-
Mexicans, yeah.
Yeah, Mexicans.
To be a great dad is the most important job in a man's life, but it doesn't have to be hard. All it takes is a few minutes of your time, because the smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
My name's Reggie. Just recently, my wife and I took in her sister's children. Now, we already had 4, so I went from becoming a family man to a man with a bigger family. Now, you can't eat love, so I don't know how I'm gonna feed them tonight. How was that, Rich?
I think I look more like Denzel.
That's cold, man.
Play a role in ending hunger. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank.
Abraham, you've been touching upon enforcement, and President Obama holds the biggest numbers of deportation. About 1,000 people are being deported every day, and it's been said that he has a formidable enforcement machinery. Will this machinery give him the upper hand in negotiating with the right on immigration reform, do you think?
Definitely. I mean, I think that you know, with politics the way that it is sort of this issue around enforcement, and I think a study just came out that sort of CBP, Customs Border Protection, and ICE sort of come out with like, they have, you know, a budget that's bigger than all of these other law enforcement agencies, bigger than the FBI, bigger than the CIA, bigger than the Secret Service, and it's all combined, CBP, ICE, all of these immigration law enforcement agencies, you know, their budget is around 18 billion. It's ridiculous. So I do think that as far as their negotiation and the political football that they're playing, I think that those are going to be one of the things that they're going to throw back and forth is sort of this idea of enforcement. So I think that as far as Obama's and this, you know, CIR goes, the Comprehensive Immigration Reform, I think enforcement is actually at the heart of the issue, as opposed to English literacy tests, as opposed to a fine. Those are things to just sort of distract the population. And so when we really look at what is being presented, we're looking at a hyper-intensive and aggressive interior enforcement where you have local law enforcement agencies working with the federal immigration authorities. And so I do think that that going forward is going to be a big issue.
Abraham, you spoke about interior security. What about the border security? Are we likely to see stepped up security, almost militarized border with Mexico?
Yes, and it's actually, if you speak to residents in the United States on the border who actually live there and spent their whole lives there, they themselves say that it's a huge detriment. Not only, I mean, it's detriment economically, and then the lives that are lost as they come across the border. It's not a very sustainable situation. But there's something else that goes on at the border, and that's the northern border. So Border Patrol can...
The northern border?
Northern border meaning Canada.
Okay.
So we have an issue here in New York State where, and actually your organization, Families for Freedom, did the study where a Border Patrol agent has a jurisdiction of over 100 miles, and they can stop. They can get on trains and ask people for identification, showing whether they're citizens or not, showing what their status is, and they've stopped cars. And our organization gets calls all the time from people who say that, you know, the driver was a citizen, he was stopped, but they asked for everyone else's papers, and then they find themselves in detention and in deportation. So, so it's, you know, it's interesting when they talk about strengthening the border. It's like, well, not only is the border strengthened, 100 miles from the border is a virtual.
Yeah, I noticed that driving back from Canada, well into New York State, there's some sort of a roadblock. I was wondering what that was all about.
Well, I mean, again, like when they say sort of securizing the border, that's exactly like how it plays out in reality. So there is this perception that, okay, one day that we're going to build this illusionary wall between Mexico and Canada, but really what we're talking about is, like Angela said, 100 miles, right, from a border. And if you look at it, a lot of states, like let's take New York, right, it's about 90%, right, air, land, sea border. So what we're seeing is that they're going further and further into the interior of the country, where we do hear of stories where someone's waiting for a bus stop, you know, let's say upstate in Rochester or in Buffalo, waiting for a bus, an inner city bus, and CBP will come on and ask them for their papers.
I mean, can you imagine that can happen in Times Square?
Right.
I mean, of course, it never will,
right. But I mean,
they could.
That jurisdiction is in New York City for sure. All of the boroughs are 100 miles.
Now, having discussed all these issues that are typically included in a immigration reform, a lot of the legislators have come up in the past few days saying that there's actually more common ground between Republicans and Democrats on the immigration issue as opposed to gun control and the fiscal debate. How optimistic are you that that's going to be helpful in the end? This common ground is going to help immigration reform happen soon?
I mean, I think that there's definitely a lot of optimism. I mean, that's clear. I think that the Republican Party has an issue with its Tea Party section of the party, and so I don't think that they see any common ground there, based on the things that we've been hearing. But I think that there will be some kind of reform. I mean, the momentum is there.
The president expected to lay some ideas in his February national annual address. What do you hope him to say in that address, Abraham?
It's really what he doesn't say, right? I hope he doesn't continue this language of sort of the criminalization and this interior enforcement. I think that that's our biggest issue, because we're also, I mean, immigration, the debate is not just around, immigrants who are here, but then also those that will come in the future. So I think that those are the things that I hope he doesn't say. I hope the language goes around. Also, what I would like him to say, actually, is something around the unity of the family, going back to the central value of the immigration sort of laws in America. I mean, it's based on immigration. So let's just be point blank and honest about that. And so if it is, this issue of saying, well, we can kick out these people and these people are just, really, I think it's irrelevant and it's moot in a larger sense.
And that's all the time we have this week for our special look at immigration reform.
I'd like to thank guests Angela Fernandez and Abraham Paulos for being in studio.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Till the next time, be independent-minded.
Which issue do you think President Obama should tackle first, immigration reform or gun control?
Well, considering the events of just last month, and I think I'm probably in agreement with most people that is likely the issue he should tackle first. Although that's not to say that he shouldn't also be dealing with immigration. I think you can do both.
I think gun control first, only because there seems to be a lot of momentum because of the horror that happened last month in Newtown. So I think he should tackle both, but start with gun control.
Both have to be addressed. I wouldn't say one before the other. They're both important.
Gun control. Yeah, gun control, because like the immigration thing I don't think it's that serious. Like, it's like, it's people that walk around here every day and we don't know everybody's nationality and everything. It's like, it's not that serious.
I think gun control is more pressing, and he has a narrower window of opportunity for that. Although immigration is equally important, if not more so.